With the latest round of conflict still raging in the Middle East, we thought it would be worthwhile to talk about the previous wars in this region. We have already covered the 1982 Lebanon War and the low-intensity conflict between Israel and Hezbollah, which ultimately led to the withdrawal of the Israeli army from Lebanon. Today we're going to talk about arguably the biggest war between these sides so far, the 2006 Lebanon War. This video is sponsored by our YouTube members and patrons, who get 2 exclusive videos weekly, not available anywhere else, for their kind support of our channel. You can join their ranks to watch more than 160 videos, including our series on the Pacific War, Punic Wars, Persian Wars, Spanish War of Succession, Russo-Japanese War, North African Campaign of World War II, History of Prussia, Italian Unification Wars, Risorgimento, Albigensian Crusades, and much more. Click the link in the description or pinned comment to get the exclusive videos, early access to all public videos, our schedule, wallpapers, access to a special Discord server where we're very active, and much more. Thanks for supporting us, we couldn't be doing it without your help. After almost 2 decades of guerrilla warfare conducted by Hezbollah against the Israeli army in South Lebanon, in 2000, the IDF had to withdraw from there. This was seen as a massive victory for this Iran and Syria-supported militant Lebanese group, but the war was far from over. Even after the Israeli withdrawal, Hezbollah continued waging war against Israel, following a threefold agenda. First, the organization aimed to free thousands of Lebanese and Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails. Second, Hezbollah considered the disputed and the Israeli-occupied Sheba Farm territory on the northern edge of Golan as Lebanese land, and wanted to secure Lebanon's control over it. Third, Hezbollah simply rejected the State of Israel. In his interview in 2000, a few months before the IDF withdrawal from South Lebanon, the organization's leader, Hassan Nasrallah, said this: "I am against any reconciliation with Israel. I do not even recognize the presence of a state that is called Israel. I consider its presence both unjust and unlawful. Hezbollah refuses any conciliation with Israel in principle." Fighting against Israel was a goal in itself, and perhaps the biggest source of legitimacy of Hezbollah, and they were not going to give up on that even after the Israeli withdrawal. In the years before the 2006 war, Hezbollah would launch occasional cross-border raids to attack the IDF. There were cases of abduction of Israeli soldiers and civilians for the purpose of using them as currency for prisoner exchange with Israel. The IDF would retaliate with their own raids on Hezbollah and bombing of the Lebanese territory. In exchange, Hezbollah would launch Katyusha rockets on North Israel. And this cycle of violence had a major potential for a full-scale war. This led to the war for which Hezbollah started preparing immediately after the Israeli withdrawal. Perhaps the biggest asset that Hezbollah had was their massive arsenal of Katyusha rockets. Israel at the time did not have the Iron Dome air defense systems yet, which were later specifically designed to shoot down short-range rockets, artillery shells, and mortars. So countering salvo after salvo of Katyushas was a problem. Not from a military standpoint, since they were imprecise, but in terms of disruption of civilian life in North Israel. To do that, Hezbollah created several rocket units, including the Nasser unit south of the Litani River, specially tasked with fighting Israel. Each unit had a vast arsenal of 122mm Katyusha rockets and several missile launchers scattered throughout the area, assigned to this unit. Measures were taken to prevent the detection of these missile launchers by Israel. The military historian Matt M. Matthews described these precautions as follows. Hezbollah's lookouts would scan the area, and once it was free of Israeli aircraft, a small group would move in to prepare the launcher for an attack, and immediately leave after that. Then another group would bring the rockets to the launcher and leave. The third group would come, prepare the rockets for firing, and then use remote-controlled or timer-based mechanisms to launch the rocket. According to Matthews, the entire process had to take less than 28 seconds to minimize the risk of being detected by the Israeli Air Force. Another rocket unit armed with medium-range Iran-made Fajr and extended-range Katyusha rockets was deployed a bit to the north. Hezbollah also created 2 rocket units for long-range strikes, armed with 610mm Zelzal 2 and other long-range systems between Beirut and the Litani River. In May 2005, Nasrallah stated that Hezbollah had more than 12,000 rockets. They were given by Iran and Syria, chief supporters of Hezbollah. The organization's ground forces were also trained in these countries. Since the IDF obviously possessed a major technological advantage in a conventional war, the main focus of Hezbollah was to train for ambushes. Iran and Syria provided scores of AT-14, Kornet-E, Tau and other anti-tank guns to inflict as much damage as possible if the Israeli army decided to invade Lebanon. One of the central topics of the current war in Gaza is the vast network of underground bunkers and tunnels used by Hamas, but Hezbollah did it first. Ever since the IDF withdrew from South Lebanon, Hezbollah started building its bunker system. In their article How Hezbollah Defeated Israel, Alistair Crook and Mark Perry described this process. Hezbollah's rocket arsenal, missile launchers, weapons, and some command and control centers were in these bunkers. They were constructed to withstand Israel's powerful and precise bombardment. Along with that, most important bunkers were dug very deep, sometimes as deep as 40 meters. Some bunkers were even air-conditioned. Moreover, Hezbollah used deception to confuse the Israeli intelligence about the location of their bunkers. Some of them were built in the open, under the eyes of Israeli drones, or in places where the local population could see them. These bunkers were decoys. Hezbollah had around 600 bunkers south of Litani. Not a single Hezbollah commander knew the location of all bunkers for security reasons. Every Hezbollah fighter cell had access to one primary bunker hiding weapons, and in case it was detected or destroyed, they had 2 reserve bunkers to rely on. It is reported that not only the Iranian Revolutionary Guard officers, but also North Korean advisors helped Hezbollah construct this bunker infrastructure. All in all, Hezbollah was well prepared for a war with Israel. They had a very large arsenal of rockets to threaten civilian life in North Israel. They had ground forces well trained in guerrilla warfare and ambushes, armed with anti-tank weapons to inflict casualties on the IDF in case of a ground invasion. And they had a sophisticated tunnel network to hide their weapons, enabling them to execute their war plan. On the contrary, various reports from that period and after the war suggest that the IDF was not as well prepared. At the time, a philosophical shift in Israeli military doctrine was taking place. Since the perception was that Israel should not expect any ground invasion on its territory due to several victories over Arab armies through the years, now the focus was going to be on the air force, precision bombardment, and expansion of the technological advantage. Budgetary cuts were made to the IDF ground forces. Reservist tank crews had little to no training. According to one report, reserve units did not have any training in large formations for 4 to 6 years. The Winograd report, the official inquiry into the war by Israel delivered after the ceasefire, criticized the quality of the equipment for reserve units. The quality of the equipment in the depots sent a message about values to the reserve soldiers, and in fact, missing, obsolete or broken equipment told the reservist that there was no one making sure he would be equipped in a manner that would allow him to operate in an optimal way when he was called to the flag. Moreover, at the time, the Second Intifada of Palestinians was going on, and many tank crewmen were sent to patrol the West Bank and Gaza Strip, in some cases going years without training on their armored vehicles. A reserve battalion commander who fought in the 2006 war summarized the state of the IDF readiness by criticizing the Israeli command for having neglected the land forces in favor of the air force, for sacrificing ground mobility on the altar of high-tech wizardry, and for squandering tank specialists in the nooks and crannies of the Intifada. On the 9th of July at 8:55 am, 2 IDF HMMWVs arrived near the border village of Zarit after an observation tower detected a Hezbollah fighter with an anti-tank missile system nearby. At 9 am, an IED exploded next to the vehicles. Immediately after that, Hezbollah fighters fired several anti-tank missiles on the vehicles, killing 3 Israeli soldiers and wounding 4 others. They then pulled 2 wounded IDF soldiers from the burning vehicles and hastily went back to Lebanon. To cause further confusion and to make sure that this abduction was successful, Hezbollah launched a barrage of mortars and rockets onto the surrounding villages. The IDF became aware of the abduction only half an hour later and broadcasted the code word Hannibal, which meant that a soldier had been kidnapped. A protocol dictated an immediate movement into Lebanon to cut off Hezbollah's escape routes, but fearing mines, explosives and ambushes, the responsible commander refused to order an incursion. Instead, another component of the protocol, barrage of artillery onto Hezbollah positions, was executed. Turns out the commander was right to be concerned, because when at 11 am, several Israeli armored vehicles and tanks moved into Lebanon and reached a hill overlooking potential escape routes, an explosive device destroyed a Merkava 4 tank, killing 4 IDF soldiers. Only an hour later, the Israeli force was ordered to destroy 69 bridges in southern Lebanon, along with the runways of Beirut airport, to prevent the escape of Hezbollah with wounded IDF soldiers. Israel's Prime Minister Ehud Olmert called the abduction of soldiers an act of war, and along with Hezbollah, he blamed it on Lebanon. At the time, Hezbollah had 2 ministers in the Lebanese government, but the Lebanese Prime Minister Fouad Siniora denied the involvement of Lebanon in this matter. The mood was set towards a massive retaliation, but Israel's first major response came only 3 days after the Hezbollah raid on July 12th. The Israeli jets and artillery conducted a powerful bombardment of Hezbollah's and Lebanon's infrastructure. It was claimed that the Israeli Air Force had destroyed 54 Zelzel rocket launchers of Hezbollah, along with striking its main propaganda outlet, Al-Manar TV station. At this point, Israel felt like they had inflicted massive damage on Hezbollah. Destruction of rocket launchers would have meant that Israel had now suppressed a significant portion of Hezbollah's firepower. The IDF Chief of Staff, Dan Halutz, was so assured of the mission's success that he reportedly told Olmert over the phone, "All the long-range rockets have been destroyed. We've won the war." Very soon it became clear that this was not the case. Still, at that point, Israel felt that it had an upper hand in this war. In a speech to the Knesset, Olmert stated that Israel aimed to ensure the release of their captive soldiers, withdrawal of Hezbollah from the border with Lebanon, and called on the Lebanese government to deploy the army against Hezbollah. Initially, Hezbollah was shocked by the scale of the Israeli response. Its leader, Hassan Nasrallah, was quoted saying, "Hezbollah has made a terrible mistake in capturing 2 IDF soldiers and killing 8 others on the morning of July 12, 2006. But as Israel continued pounding Lebanon, Hezbollah started fighting back. Nasrallah started making almost daily defiant speeches on Al-Manar, which after a brief disruption continued its operation. At that point, the Israeli Navy started blockading Beirut. On July 14th, Nasrallah was making another speech on Al-Manar when he said, "Look at the warship that has attacked Beirut, while it burns and sinks before your very eyes." At this point, the footage of a missile striking the INS Hanit corvette was shown on TV. Even though the ship was only damaged, it was a clever propaganda move to show an Israeli warship being sunk on live television, since nobody expected Hezbollah to have anti-ship cruise missiles capable of harming them. It also demonstrated the lack of preparedness on the Israeli side, since Hanit had an automatic missile defense system which was not activated, since Israel did not have intelligence that Hezbollah possessed anti-ship cruise missiles. So, only a few days after the July 12th airstrikes, it became apparent that Hezbollah was far from defeated. According to Matt M. Wallace, on July 14th, the Israeli intelligence advised the government that an airstrike campaign and small incursions would be insufficient to defeat Hezbollah. On July 15th and 16th, the Israeli Air Force continued bombarding Lebanon, killing 31 people. But Hezbollah now proved that its capacity to retaliate was still intact. On July 16th, a long-range rocket struck Haifa, killing 8 people. Earlier we described the rocket preparation of Hezbollah, so some if not most of its rocket infrastructure was operational, which allowed the militants to continue fighting. The deputy commander of the Baram Brigade of the IDF, Ishai Efroni, described the Hezbollah way of fighting in a very eloquent way. The Hezbollah fighter wakes up in the morning, drinks his coffee, takes a rocket out of his closet, goes to his neighbor's yard, sticks a clock timer on it, goes back home, and then watches CNN to see where it lands. Resisting such a tactic with only airstrikes was futile. Throughout this 33-day war, Hezbollah continued launching rockets into Israel. And even though from a purely military standpoint, these strikes had a minor impact, they disrupted civilian life and caused death and destruction in Israel. 41 Israeli civilians were killed by these strikes, while 100,000 to 250,000 were forced to flee the most affected cities like Kiryat Shmona, Nahariya and Safed, which obviously led to dwindling morale in Israeli society and fatigue from the war. While Hezbollah failed to strike bigger cities further away from the border like Tel Aviv, which indicates that the Israeli bombardment was successful at least to some extent in decreasing the long-range strike capability of Hezbollah, they maintained their overall capacity to strike Israel throughout the war. Most of the Hezbollah strikes had been conducted with the 122mm Grad and Katyusha rockets provided by Syria. They even used improvised Ababel-T drones equipped with small explosives, something we are seeing now in the war in Ukraine. Overall, Hezbollah made 475 rocket attacks throughout the war, with 8 to 9 rockets launched per attack. The IDF's official statement notes the number of 3,970 rockets launched, and General Ben Ismail claims a slightly larger number of 4,200 rockets. Most of Hezbollah's strikes were launched from near Tyre, south of Bekaa Valley, and along the Litani River, both to the south and north. As it became clear that Israel's initial bombardment was insufficient to win the war, the ground assault started becoming inevitable. On July 17th, the first relatively major IDF incursion began near Maroun el-Ras. This assault was led by the elite Maglan unit, with an aim to establish a foothold for further operations in South Lebanon. One of the Maglan soldiers would later say about the battle, "We expected a tent and 3 Kalashnikovs. That was the intelligence we were given. Instead, we found a hydraulic steel door leading to a well-equipped network of tunnels." Soon the Maglans were outnumbered and almost surrounded. In order to overcome the Hezbollah resistance there, the IDF had to send more forces, including elements of the Golani Brigade and the 35th Paratrooper Brigade. After a few more days of heavy fighting, by July 24th, elements of the Golani Brigade and the 7th Armor Brigade managed to largely defeat the Hezbollah resistance in Manar el-Ras and moved northwards to establish positions around Bint Jabal. But by then it became clear that Hezbollah was fighting back more strongly than was expected. So on July 21st, the reservists started being called up in Israel. On July 25th, the 35th Paratrooper Brigade moved north of Bint Jabal to prevent any Hezbollah reinforcements from entering the town. Even though very soon it was proclaimed that the IDF was in control of this town, Hezbollah was still actively resisting inside the town and shelling the Israeli forces. On July 26th, the 51st Battalion of the Golani Brigade entered the town from the east. Companies A and C were immediately ambushed by Hezbollah fighters armed with small arms, machine guns, RPGs, anti-tank missiles, and artillery. They took advantage of the urban defense by taking positions in upper stories of buildings. 9 IDF soldiers were killed in action and 27 were wounded. Despite this, Israel did not manage to take Bint Jabal fully under its control until the end of the war. Before August 1st, the IDF was still sending in only battalion and brigade-sized forces into Lebanon, which clearly was not enough. By August 5th, it was estimated that the IDF had some 10,000 soldiers fighting in Lebanon, but they had only advanced as deep as 4 kilometers at most. According to various sources, Hezbollah had only 3,000 men south of the River Litani, which was enough to keep the IDF at bay. And as the stalemate in South Lebanon persisted, while more and more civilians were dying, the voices in favor of ceasefire became more powerful. In his interview to the BBC, the former US ambassador to the UN, John Bolton, admitted that for a while, the United States resisted calls for a ceasefire. The American strategy was to buy Israel as much time as possible to defeat Hezbollah. Hezbollah was widely seen as an Iranian proxy in the region. Even some Arab states shared this view. According to the UN Special Envoy, Taya Rod-Lashen, there were many not, how should I put it, resistant to the thought that the Israelis should thoroughly defeat Hezbollah, who, increasingly by Arab states, were seen as an Iranian proxy. Indeed, early in the war, Saudi Arabia condemned Hezbollah for its adventurism. But by August, the momentum for a ceasefire was too strong to ignore. On August 11th, the UN Security Council unanimously adopted Resolution 1701, calling for an immediate ceasefire. As the war was coming to an end, Israel made a couple more attempts to ensure advantage before agreeing to a ceasefire. But again, their attacks were of a small scale, and it is difficult to find a coherent strategy behind them. On August 11th, an airborne reserve division entered Debel, but by the time the ceasefire went into effect on August 14th, they had managed to advance only by 1 to 2 kilometers northwards. Along the coastal road, the IDF made progress towards Mansouri by the end of the war. The 91st Division moved from the Bint Jabal sector towards the coast, but its progress was also modest. The paratrooper units of the Nahal Brigade landed without any resistance near Fron and Gandoria. As the 401st Brigade moved towards this area to secure it, they were ambushed in Wadi al-Saluki, with 11 out of 24 Merkava 4 tanks being hit by anti-tank missiles. On August 13th, a day before the ceasefire, several other airborne drops were conducted south of the Litani in an attempt to capture more territory in this area, but this did not amount to much either. In the final act of war, Hezbollah fired 250 more rockets into Israel. On August 14th, the fighting stopped. When everything was said and done, more than 1,000 Lebanese and 44 Israeli civilians were killed. Thousands more were injured, displaced, and saw their homes destroyed. There was widespread destruction throughout Lebanon and in North Israel. Both sides declared victory, but Israel did not achieve any of its original war aims. They could not free 2 captive soldiers, they could not destroy Hezbollah, and to this day this organization is firing rockets on North Israel. For Hezbollah, simply not being defeated was equal to winning against a much more powerful and technologically advanced army. Maintaining their fighting capacity and firing rockets on Israel further boosted its legitimacy in Lebanon as the preeminent resistance force in the country. According to Nazir Hussain, after the war, Hezbollah distributed $12,000 to each family whose home was destroyed during the war, which obviously further boosted their popularity among the ordinary Lebanese. Ultimately, the 2006 Lebanon War did not solve the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah, as the sides have been engaged in a low-intensity conflict ever since, and there is a chance that it may boil over to another round of full-scale war very soon. We will talk about the conflicts in the Middle East more in the coming months. To make sure you don't miss them, make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Recently, we've started releasing weekly Patreon and YouTube member exclusive content. Consider joining their ranks via the link in the description or button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.